Hi folks, Lawrence Patias here, welcome back. In this lecture we're going to talk about not emotion but memory of emotion, right? So how well are we able to remember how angry we were 10 years ago, that kind of thing. We're going to be focusing on theory, adapting the theories that we've already talked about, Catharsis theory, what does that predict? What does appraisal theory predict? And also some past research. So the basic theory is that current appraisals are a major cause of current emotion, right? You know this from last lecture, but we're building on this here as well. And we're adding to that to say that current appraisals are probably a cause of memory of emotion. The reason I say that is because I'm going to show you some research that shows that that is true, including some of my research from 2019 as well. The top relationship you can see here, current appraisals causing current emotion, is basically the cognitive appraisal theory of emotion, isn't it? It is Lazarus's theory. This bottom theory here, current appraisals having a minor cause on memory of emotions, was first proposed, I think, by Linda Levine in 1997. The theories that compete with this are, of course, Catharsis theory. Freud, you already know this, so we're going to skip over it quite quickly. But think about what it predicts in terms of memory of emotions, not emotions. We talked about emotions last time. In terms of memory of emotions, it would predict that memories of emotions should be accurate. If they're stored pristinely, then when you bring them up, they should be accurate. So that makes its own prediction, which is not actually supported, as you will see as we go through some evidence. Now, not only that, some biological psychologists, such as Joseph Ledoux, did some early work where he found that there were reverberating limbic system structures in fear responses in rodents, and he interpreted that as emotions being stored indelibly in the lower brain. Again, I don't think that is supported. Let's put it this way. When you take that theory and apply it to human emotion, I don't think it's supported, because that indelibility theory says that emotion is indelible, such that when you recall it, you should be pulling up the same emotion with the same accuracy. So it predicts accurate recall of memory of emotion, and you can see these competing theories are not supported as we go through. Now, there is some clues in early research about how good or how bad memory of emotion is. In Flashbulb memory research, for example, that focuses on people's memory for very salient news events such as the Kennedy assassination or the Challenger disaster or 9/11, etc. So in this initial study, Brown and Kulik talked about their findings, giving the impression that emotional events might be stored accurately. However, follow-up research showed that they were a little bit premature in concluding that. They studied the Kennedy assassination, and they came up with the idea that these kind of emotional memories are cut and printed like a photographic idea, hence the term flashbulb memory, which, by the way, is a misnomer. Our memory does not work like a flashbulb, and I wish people would take that out of the jargon that they use. However, in subsequent flashbulb research, which was better designed, they showed great unreliability in memories of emotions, especially when they asked individuals, how did you feel right after the Challenger disaster? Those memories for emotion were the most unreliable compared to details, right? So this is early clues that memories of emotions might not be that great. And that research I'm talking about just then is Nisa and Harsh, 1992, on the Challenger disaster in the 1980s. And this was backed up in a more recent study in 2015 by the Hirsch group here, where they found similarly inconsistencies in memories of emotion about how people felt after 9/11. There were inconsistencies in the details of what they remembered too, but the most malleable type of memory was memory of emotions. All right, so it gives us a general impression that memories of emotions might not be consistent. But I think there's even better work than this that we're going to get onto that identifies why memories of emotions might be malleable. And as I said, flashbulb memories is a misnomer. That's not how memory works. We don't cut and print and photograph. Now let me just establish the importance of what we're talking about here. We use our memories of emotion in many decisions and judgments we make. Let me bring this home to you. For example, in the forensic setting, now I may say this now and it won't cross your mind how relevant that is, but just keep it in mind as you go through your life and you deal with cases. Remember what I said about memories of emotion being important in the forensic setting. For example, we make decisions on whether we're going to press charges or not based on our memories of emotion. We make decisions on whether to bring a civil case or not based on how we remember those emotions according to, how injured we think we have been emotionally in the past. It is an important factor. And please, as you go through your career and you see memories of emotions coming into legal cases, please give me an email. Once a student of mine, always a student of mine. You can contact me in the future. Now, in personal relationships, it's very important too. Think about this. When we're deciding whether to marry somebody, do we rely upon our memories of emotion? How much positive feelings that we remember feeling with our partner for the last year? That probably comes into the decision, how much love did we feel for our partner in the last 5 years? That might come into the decision. Some of this might be unconscious, but memories of emotion are important and they come out of appraisals. They can change because of appraisals. Now, some pioneering work, in my view, and this is probably because I was in Linda Levine's lab for a while in graduate school, is her work on reconstructing memory for emotions. So I think the thinking about emotions as being reconstructive and getting the framework from early memory distortion researchers, I think was a great contribution from Levine, and I think I got my ideas from her, of course. So she found that supporters of the US presidential candidate Ross Perot tended to bias their memories of emotion about his withdrawal, and those biases depended on their appraisal of Ross Perot. So the participants rated their current emotions towards the event of Ross Perot withdrawing a few days after his withdrawal from the 1992 presidential race. After that, some supporters stayed loyal, others did not, and these differences provided naturally occurring changes in appraisal of the target event. Then, like any good natural experiment, Ross Perot re-entered the race a few months later, which made things interesting. After the election in November, Ross Perot came third, but captured a full 19% of the vote. Levine asked the participants again what they remembered of their emotions originally when Perot had withdrew from the race. And she found biases. She found that their memories of emotions were biased in accordance to how they had reappraised Perot's withdrawal. For example, if they had become anti-Perot after his withdrawal. For example, if Perot had lost their support after his decision to withdraw, and they still held diminished appraisals of him after the election, in other words, they're not supporters anymore, they would remember their initial anger relatively accurately. In contrast, those supporters who had turned against Perot after the withdrawal, but they reappraised the situation after the election and became a supporter again, they remembered being less angry about his withdrawal than they actually were at the time. So let's take you through this particular group. So this particular group of supporters, after the withdrawal, were asked in the present, and then they reported being very angry at that time. However, if they had changed their mind after the election, they became supporters of him again, they misremember in this following way. They report saying, on a Likert scale, that they were less angry when he withdrew than they actually were at the time. So this is a longitudinal study that did not use random assignment, but it was a good clue about how things may be occurring. Now there's some additional results from Levine. Returning supporters also overestimated their reports of feeling hope after his withdrawal. After the withdrawal, they felt low levels of hope in the present when they were asked. But after the election, when they were remembering back, they misremembered. In other words, they reported that they were hopeful after he withdrew. Now these effects are smaller than I'm exaggerating here. I'm just trying to clarify what happened. There's been some other work on memory of emotion by Martin Safer, who's also worked with Linda Levine. Now, in this study, he found that memories of grief are malleable too. So it was asking individuals about their grief about the death of a spouse, and he found that over time, the memories of grief changed according to the current appraisals of that death several years later. So if you appraised that death of the spouse in perhaps a positive way, I know that sounds an awful thing to say, but what I mean by that is you appraised it as being that life of my spouse was just a positive in my life and I value that time we had together, then the memories of grief were not so high. But those people who stayed fixated on the tragedy of the death of the spouse tended to remember more memories of grief later on. Now, there have been some experiments also on memories of emotion. For example, Kuhler and Safer, Martin Safer again, in what they called the first controlled experiment to investigate memories of emotion. They found that graduate students who were told they passed a comprehensive exam tended to overestimate pre-exam anxiety. Some individuals were randomly assigned to get the results of their comprehensive exam in graduate school. All of them did pass, by the way. Those who were told they had passed tended to overestimate their pre-exam anxiety compared to those who were still hanging, who didn't yet get their exam results. Another experiment in memory of emotion was done by Hovsapian and Levine, where they randomly assigned people into groups that varied on how putting an arm in ice water was appraised. In other words, everybody put their arm in ice water. Some were in reappraisal groups, others were in suppression groups, and some of them were in control groups. So different ways of appraising pain when the arm was in ice water. They did not actually find a main effect for appraisal group compared to control group on memory of pain, but they did find an interaction. So only those individuals who scored high on anxiety sensitivity, was there a difference between the appraisal up condition and the control condition. So in other words, in a subset of individuals, there was a difference. So as you can see, experimental work is less than complete in establishing a consistent causal relationship, although I did some research that I'm going to show you in the next lecture, which adds some evidence to that causal relationship. And what I'm talking about here is a causal relationship between current cognitive appraisals and memories of emotions. Now, there's been some other longitudinal work as well as Levine's 1997, such as Levine's 2001 paper on the O.J. not guilty verdict. So what they found was changes over time in memory for happiness, anger, and surprise were found in the direction consistent with current appraisals of the not guilty verdict that O.J. Simpson received for the murder. Now, so in other words, if you reappraised your idea that he was guilty or not guilty, that would change your memory of how happy or angry you were when you first heard the verdict. So the question was something like, how did you feel when you heard the O.J. Simpson verdict? And then you have a scale for happiness, a scale for anger, a scale for surprise, and so on. So that is some clues, right, that memories of emotion is malleable. And I'm showing you as many studies as I can so that you understand that this is not a shallow area of research, right? So you've got all this as ammunition if somebody doubts you when you say that memories of emotion are malleable. In 2005, Levine and colleagues produced a paper about memories of emotion of 9/11, September 11, 2001, the terrorist attacks in New York City. And they measured memories of emotion 3 months and 8 months afterwards. What they found was those who appraised the attacks of having less impact recalled lower negative emotions after 9/11, and in these participants, negative emotions decreased with time. In contrast, those who appraised the attacks as having higher impact showed an increase over time on memory of negative emotion. So as you can see, longitudinal studies bolster the case that appraisals bias memories of emotions. So in summary, catharsis theory and appraisal theory give us very different predictions about memories of emotion. Catharsis theory and indelibility theory may predict that memories of emotions will be accurate, consistent over time. Appraisal theory would predict that as appraisals change, memories of emotions may change as well. And you have seen the weight of evidence in the literature today. Okay, thank you very much for your time. I hope this was new information for you, that you enjoyed. This information that I'm presenting to you really changed the way I think about memory and relationships. Of course, you probably can relate this to yourself, right? So how do you remember somebody? Have your memories of emotion change towards them, and how fair is that? Okay, thanks very much. Talk to you again.